welcome back again to this channel where we spread love and positive vibes. And I want to start my video today by thanking our new subscribers, our returning subscribers. We really value you, we appreciate you, we don't take you for granted, and thank you so much. Today's video is somehow sad and very emotional because all of us would want to see our brothers and sisters happy, going on with their lives, developing, uplifting themselves, and we celebrate for their victory and success. But when we see our brothers and sisters crying in poverty and in wars that are not ending, then we become sad. What am I talking about? I'm talking about the state in Haiti. We all know that some Kenyan soldiers were sent to Haiti to maintain peace. And I understand that some Jamaican soldiers have also been sent to Haiti to maintain peace. At first, I didn't know what was happening in Haiti, and I had very little knowledge about Haiti because I did not take time to learn about these gangs. Where did they originate from? What made these gangs to be formed? What are they fighting for? Are they after the welfare of the people of Haiti? What about the other side? Who are actually the government of Haiti, or rather the current leaders of Haiti, and who backs them? And what is their agenda? And that is what we are going to discuss today. First of all, it is very important to understand the Haiti people have been faced with a lot of hardship and a lot of things that have not been going well. Like they have faced hurricanes, just like any other Caribbean islands, earthquakes, and of course diseases like cholera, not to mention hunger, and therefore the people of Haiti actually needs a leadership that is going to bring peace, that is going to bring accountability and transparency. But this has not been the case, because when I did my investigation, I found that Haiti has been having a decade of corrupt leadership and weakened democratic institutions supported by some superpowers, and because of this, it has brought a lot of unrest, a lot of lawlessness, and a lot of fights in Haiti. And I want to say that I would want to see Haiti peaceful, Haiti developing, Haiti waking up again to be the Haiti which we were seeing, a very beautiful Haiti which has no war or fights or all what we see. And I want to start by saying, where did these groups, gang groups as they are called, come from? Where did they originate? I want us to understand that, because we cannot understand, or rather we cannot come to a solution of what is happening in Haiti without understanding where these gangs came from. As I was going through my investigation, I realized that there are two strong gang groups in Haiti. One led by Barbecue, and the other one led by another person. I could not really get his name. And these two groups are the strongest of the groups that are fighting in Haiti. Initially, they used to fight amongst themselves, and therefore no civilian or no common man was affected by their fights. But they escalated their fights to actually touch the common man, attacking the prisons, attacking the police stations, attacking the government institutions. And therefore, it became now like a gang, although I don't know how true this is. I'm just highlighting what I found in my investigation. If you come from Haiti, if you come from a country near Haiti, and you know what is on the ground, you can actually tell us in the comment section. So I found that these gangs, they actually attack sometimes the common man, and they are accused of raping and being brutal to the people. But I want to understand What can make a people that claims to fight for their sisters and brothers turn to be that brutal? I don't want to answer that question. Maybe the people on the ground can answer us. But first of all, these groups actually were formed by strong politicians. They are politically formed, and they are formed by very, very strong people in the society, the elites, the businessmen, and also the political class. So they are actually people who are formed to actually defend the rights of a certain group of people, either politicians or businessmen or their rights in the society. And therefore, these groups are actually aligned to the people that made them to be formed. Like when I was looking at the group of barbecue, it was formed by the former prime minister who was actually assassinated. And that prime minister, by the name, I think Moses, something like that, that prime minister, before the assassination, he had appointed another prime minister who was called Henry. And therefore, Henry took over from that prime minister who was assassinated, and he took over the government as the prime minister. And there was a lot of lawlessness because Henry himself was not democratically elected. He was actually appointed by, I don't know whether it is UN or United States of America, but he was, although maybe they didn't appoint him, he was appointed by maybe the other prime minister, but they backed him. They supported him. They actually started supporting him in a very strong way. And let me go back straightly and say the UN and the United States of America are actually telling us they are fighting for the democratic rights of the Haiti people. If for sure they are fighting for democratic rights of the Haiti people, they are not supposed to support a leader who was not actually elected by the people. He was actually appointed, not elected by the people, and he was imposed to the people by a certain group of people. And therefore, if you're standing for democracy, if you're standing for the majority of the rights of the people of Haiti, then you are not supposed to support a leader who was not elected democratically. He was just appointed. Number two, if the UN and the United States of America really were for democracy, they would not have supported this guy. And number two, they would have sat these people down, the two groups that are fighting each other, and look for solutions peacefully without taking sides. But that was not the case. They actually supported Henry, and the other factions were actually refusing him and declaring that he must resign. And therefore, Henry, I think he got tired of back and forth, and also the United States of America pushed him to resign so that there can be peace. And finally, he announced that he was to resign, and CARICOM is an organization that covers all the islands in the Caribbean, and they come together and discuss matters concerning the Caribbean islands. And therefore, CARICOM sat down in a meeting to discuss the way forward for the people of Haiti. How best can the problems facing them be solved? Because at this time, Henry had actually announced that he was going to resign. And therefore, they wanted to sit down and see a smooth transition and a peaceful transition so that the war can end in Haiti. But as they were doing that, they sat down together with UN, Canada, United States of America were represented. And this now brings another question. Why should these countries come to a CARICOM meeting that is discussing their neighbors, the Haitians? I thought they should sit down as the CARICOM community and discuss what best is for their neighbors in Haiti. But instead of that, the meeting was actually these people, the UN and the United States of America and even Canada were involved in the meeting. And they were therefore in that meeting, and nobody disclosed what was the discussion in the meeting or what was going on. And I want to tell to think, if this meeting was actually to assist the people of Haiti, to help them to restore peace, then it should not have been a secret meeting. Everything being discussed would have been in the media. Maybe they can argue that the gang groups will know their strategy and they will start maybe planning how to retaliate. But I also see when the Kenyan troops were to be sent to Haiti, it was all over the media houses. It was not a secret. It was announced to everyone that the Kenyan soldiers are being transported to Haiti so that they can actually restore peace. And therefore, whatever was being discussed in this meeting, it would have been announced to everyone so that at least people can see there are people that are concerned about them and they are actually discussing of how they can restore peace. The leaders of Haiti, armed groups, had actually taken over 80% of the capital city of Haiti, and therefore, if Henry resigned and the CARICOM discussed on how a smooth transition would take place, maybe it would have ended the war in Haiti. But somebody suggested that this would not have happened because, according to Jimmy Chelsea, who is actually barbecue, he said he rejected any proposed solution read by international communities, and therefore he would not accept it. And therefore this meeting that was being held by CARICOM and the stakeholders, the UN, the USA and Canada, barbecue had completely refused to accept such kind of discussions. And therefore, it was actually a meeting, according to the sources, that would not have yielded any positivity in terms of stopping the war. Because according to the gang leaders, you are not supposed to incorporate the international communities as you discuss the problems of Haiti. They would have been discussed by the CARICOM and include some maybe Haitian leaders so that they can come with a solution on what to do. And therefore this did not happen because, like I said earlier, the US and the UN were actually incorporated in the meeting to discuss on the way forward. And therefore, this is what happened. So we are still talking about the CARICOM meeting and the UN involvement and the United States of America involvement and also the Canada. Jake Johnston, a Haiti expert and senior research associate at the Center for Economic and Policy Research in Washington, D.C., said CARICOM's announced meeting is unlikely to lead to a solution to the current crisis by itself. So he doubted whether this meeting was to bring a solution to the problems that were happening in Haiti. Why was Jake doubting this meeting that incorporated the UN, the USA, the Canadians, and also the CARICOM community? He actually said that such a meeting is not worth, because according to Jake, he criticized Henry for relying on the support of the US and other foreign powers, and therefore doubted whether a meeting incorporating these powers would come to any solution. Therefore, he doubted whether these meetings was to bring any solution. He also actually said that the discussions by CARICOM, Canada, USA, and all that met is actually not going to yield any fruits, because obviously the groups that were actually fighting, the groups that were actually bringing this war, had initially refused any involvement in the international community for any solution to Haiti's problems. And therefore they thought the Haitians themselves can solve their problems by sitting down, discussing, and having the way forward. Let me, guys, go straight to the side of the gangs. So we have seen CARICOM and the United Kingdom, no, the UN and the USA and Canada had met to look at the way forward together with CARICOM. And this meeting is being doubted whether it will yield any fruits, because the gangs were citing the involvement of international community in these meetings and actually suggested a meeting without international communities. And therefore, what is the interest of the gangs in all this? Because they have refused a meeting incorporating international community. Like I have said earlier, these gangs are actually politically formed, or they are actually standing for the what? For the will and the purpose of the rights in Haiti and the business community. And therefore, these gangs also wanted to be involved in the discussions so that they can share in the cake for political, or rather political sharing of Haiti. In other words, they wanted their own share in the formation of the government, in the running of government, in the all the things to do with Haiti government. They wanted to be involved in some way. And it is actually very, very stressing, because on the other hand, the United States of America spokesperson had clearly said that the gangs were not supposed to be in those meetings to discuss peace. He actually cited they are supposed to be in jail. And most analysts and experts had agreed that it is important to understand how Haiti reached where they are. How did Haiti come to the point that there is war throughout and there is no solution? This is how Haiti came to be where they are. The experts said Henry should never have had the backing of Washington, the UN, and other Western powers to begin with. So I had said earlier that the backing of Henry by the US, the UN, and the Western powers was a wrong move. Because if these people are preaching democracy, then they were not supposed to sideline, or rather to take sides in the government. They were supposed to be neutral and not participate in supporting one side. So the fact that they had supported Henry and they had actually stood with him already showed that they are not after democracy. They are actually siding with one side of the gang. And therefore, because like I said earlier, remember that Henry was appointed by the prime minister that was assassinated, who was actually one of the people that formed one of the gangs. And therefore, these gangs are actually politically formed and they have strong powers in Haiti. And therefore, Henry, in the first place, if the UN, the USA, and all the Western powers wanted the people of Haiti to listen to them, they would not have taken sides. And according to sources, Henry himself was pressurized to resign and allow elections to be held, but he refused. communities would have been listened by these groups, the gangs. Now, let us ask ourselves, is Jamaica and Kenya right in going to Haiti to support the people, or rather to keep peace like we are being told? I would first say that, let me first talk about Kenya. Kenya in particular has a lot of problems here at home. I'm not saying it's wrong for Kenya to go and actually defend their brothers, or rather make sure that their brothers and sisters are at peace, but I don't understand why this move and this decision comes after our president goes to Washington, D.C., sits down with the current president, and comes back and tells us that there are some troops that are going to be deployed to Haiti. First of all, if this decision had come from Kenya without influence from outside, I would maybe have said Kenyans have the right to go and defend the brothers and sisters and sustain or rather maintain peace. But the fact that this came after our president jetted, and it brought a lot of controversy here in the country because he used a private jet to go to US and have a discussion with the US government. Then he comes back quickly and announced that some police officers were to be deployed to Haiti, makes us to actually doubt the motive and doubt whether it was actually for the people of Haiti or there was something else behind the scenes. And therefore, when I am saying that as Kenyans, we have a lot of problems. And how did Kenya find itself going to Haiti? According to what I investigated, CARICOM, when they sat down, they actually agreed on some proposals that are going to take place. They agreed that they are going to back Haiti to erect some leaders, and 2 of them to be appointed to stand for religious groups and the other one to stand for civil rights. So those 2 were not to be elected, but the rest were to be elected. And even before this had happened, the U.S. spokesperson came and said that they have given these groups 24 to 48 hours to actually erect, or rather to bring these people to board. Remember that these people were supposed to be elected in a democratic way, and being given 24 to 48 hours, that was not enough time to actually tell the people to elect their leaders. So that shows there is somehow a motive behind it. And then after that, he said that after these people have been elected, who CARICOM had agreed, then they were to come and actually elect a prime minister. So the US government was to participate in the election of a US an interim prime minister in the near future, according to him. Actually, let me state the statement that he said. The spokesman, Matthew Miller, told reporters that Washington expects the members of the council to be appointed within 24 to 48 hours. This is the council that CARICOM had discussed that they are going to actually do what? Officiate the council being elected democratically by an election. And then they were to appoint 2, one to stand for the religious groups and the other one to stand for the civil rights. So according to CARICOM, that was the order of electing the leaders that are going to stand and actually see the peace of Haiti being restored. But now, the prime minister, the spokesman, not prime minister, the U.S. Department of State spokesman, Matthew Miller, comes and says, this council has to be appointed within 24 to 48 hours. This now removes democracy and brings about people being appointed. And then he says that they will later appoint an interim prime minister in the near future. That automatically removes democracy. CARICOM also suggested that there should be international security mission to Haiti led by the Kenyan soldiers or the Kenyan police and supported or backed by UN. So it is in this meeting of CARICOM where the Kenyan soldiers were actually to be deployed to Haiti so that they can be backed by UN to restore peace. They later said anyone opposed to the Kenyan-led mission would be excluded from the transitional council. You see? Now this transitional council was to be elected democratically by people. Now there comes another statement from CARICOM that if there is a group that is going to oppose the deployment of the Kenyan police to Haiti, then they are going to be sidelined or opposed, or rather they are going to be left out in the appointing of transitional council. And this raised more questions about who is dictating the country's political transition. So you can see there is a lot of contradiction. When I have said our president went all the way to US, came back and said some soldiers were to be deployed to Haiti. Now you have seen there was a meeting that had been held in Jamaica. Actually, this meeting was held in Kingston, Jamaica, and CARICOM had agreed on appointment of some leaders to actually officiate the peace transition of Haiti. But now we have come and seen, they have come with another statement that reflects that these leaders were not actually to be appointed democratically. They were actually supposed to be appointed. And it was very sad because I don't think that the going of the Kenyan soldier and later the Jamaican soldier was actually something that was from the Jamaica government or from the Kenyan government. It was something that was actually pushed to them and they agreed. They were actually told, or rather maybe they were promised some things and they accepted to take the soldiers to Haiti. Now my question is, are our soldiers, Jamaican soldiers and Kenyan soldiers, actually maintaining peace in Haiti? The people on the ground on Haiti can answer that question. Because according to the majority of the people, as I was going through my investigation, most of the people feel that the Kenyan soldiers and the Jamaican soldiers would not have gone. They would have led the Haitians to sort out their problems without interference from anyone, without interference from the black countries, without interference from the Western people, powers, and we should allow them to sit down as Haiti people and agree on how they're going to share power in their own country. Because I'm sure they would have come to a conclusion. Because the bringing of these groups to Haiti, and we can see that the gangs in Haiti are not just simple people. They are strong people with weapons, sophisticated weapons of war, and they are actually bringing about a great resistance to the people that are fighting them. And these groups, it's like they have money, they are very well equipped, they are very, very stable when it comes to finances, and therefore it becomes very, very hard to subdue them. And therefore I think if these groups actually accept that they sit down, discuss with the people in power, and come up with a formula to share power, and they should not impose things and cause chaos and cause fights, they should sustain peace, then I think they cannot just destroy their country if it is left on their hands. They can actually come up with a formula, because I think what they reject most is the corrupt leaders, because you have seen the country of Haiti has been with corrupt leaders, wicked democratic institutions, and therefore people feel they have no right. Everything is imposed on them. And maybe that is why there are these the gang groups. And if they can be involved, maybe the two gangs to be called, and their leaders to sit down with the people in the leadership of Haiti government. And they discuss on how to share powers and how they are going to run the country without selfishness, without self-gain, without corruption, without all this. And with the people of Haiti in mind, with peace in mind, then they can take Haiti to the next level. We actually saw Haiti is a very, very beautiful country with a lot of resources, with a lot of ability, but the war has made it go down. The war has made it to remain behind. It is actually considered the poorest country in the Caribbean. And this is so sad to the people of Haiti who cannot go about their businesses, who cannot go about their working, who cannot go around the town and the places safely because they are fearing. I think the people of Haiti are more than our individual interest. They are more than the individual interest of the gang people. They are more than the individual interest of the government. They are more than the individual interest of the people outside Haiti. And therefore, every person, if they want peace for Haiti, then they should allow the Haitians to sit down and come up with solutions to their own problems. Because I don't understand why we want to dictate to them, why we want to impose to them leaders, why we want to say this is what is going to happen. Why are we so interested in Haiti? Haitians are grown-ups. They are mature people. They can think. They know their country. They love their country. They can be able to sit down and come up with solutions that are going to benefit their country. But when the outsiders interfere, the outsiders have interest, then that is why maybe peace cannot be found in Haiti. And I really pray for the people of Haiti to have peace. For all these groups to put their interest aside and consider the poor man of Haiti, the common man of Haiti, and the sufferings they are going through. Maybe the gang people have money, the government have money, the other parties have money, but the common Haiti man is dying of hunger, is dying of sickness and diseases, is dying of the problems that are facing Haiti. Why don't we put our interests aside and consider the common man of Haiti? Number two, the Kenyan people and the Jamaicans have their own problems. Here at home, I can assure you, we have problems just like Haiti. There is a lot of hunger. There is a lot of poverty. There is a lot of diseases. There is a lot of political unrest. Why don't we first solve our problems before we go to interfere with other people's problems? And I'm sure Jamaica also has its own problem. It has a lot of maybe unrest in terms of crime. It has a lot of things that they can solve instead of sending people to go and support Haiti. Because I believe, given a chance and given time, Haitians can solve their own problems. So, for the people that are interfering with them, I think it's a high time we let the Haiti people sit down and have their cake, divide their cake, find solutions to their problems, and sustain peace. Because after all, that is what we want, peace in Haiti. But when we continue resisting, this group keep on fighting and killing people, that will not benefit anyone. Instead, it is the poor people of Haiti that are going to suffer. So guys, I hope that that happens, and we pray that Haiti maintains peace. So see you during the next video. Bye bye and God bless.